Well, welcome everybody. Good evening for us in the old continent, and I suppose good afternoon for those on the other side of the Atlantic. This evening, the presentation of a UFO organization will be a prestigious one, both as organization and as the guest. Mark Rodeghier should need no presentation. He is the scientific director of the Center for UFO Studies, CUFOS, a sociologist, and he is also the president, the present president of CUFOS. So, Mark, that's up to you and to your screen if you want to share it.
Yes, I will do that. I will get it up here and then I'll start talking. I think I'm in reading view now. Yes. Hey, thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate your attendance. I will be talking not briefly, but not at great length about CUFOS, but I would be very happy to answer your questions both about the history of the organization, including details that maybe are not normally talked about, and then of course current plans, but also going forward. I'm going to end my talk with some comments about where I think the field should be going, not just CUFOS, but things in general. And I look forward to your own comments and thoughts about that. And of course, in particularly after what the last few years. So many people in the call and the meeting have been around a long time, but there are some newcomers here. So just a little bit of history about CUFOS and how it was founded and why it was founded, and et cetera. And we've got a couple of people here who actually volunteered for CUFOS, even in the old country. So, but as most of you know, it was founded in late 1973 by Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And it's worth noting that while he'd been thinking about founding it already, and this type of an organization, the immediate impetus was the 1973 UFO wave. In the southeastern and eastern United States. He was frustrated that that was happening, that he didn't think it was being studied adequately, and he thought, I just have to go ahead and found this organization that I've been talking about. And so he did. And from 1973 until his death, yes, he was the scientific director. And then I was appointed that, after his death, or he anointed me before that, and here I still am today. The current CUFOS board are the people you see listed there, and like many UFO groups who are still standing, unfortunately we know that in Europe several organizations have been disbanded, but very few places have their own office. Though I know that the Italian Center for UFO Studies does, and to be commended for that, to manage to pull that off. But we weren't. And so our last physical office was closed in 2009. I will say that while it's nice to have a place to meet, two things have mollified that. One is, of course, the internet. And in fact, very rarely now do people want to visit the archives. They'd rather have us scan things and send it to them electronically. We all know that. Secondly, we have been meeting the kind of the CUFOS core group, plus others, have been meeting for years in Kalamazoo, Michigan. The three spots where the CUFOS archives are now located are Chicago, and right below me in my basement and in a storage area, Michigan, Kalamazoo, Michigan, where Mike Swords is located, and in New Mexico, with the National UFO Historical Records Center in David Marler. In fact, that's where the actual CUFOS case files are located. A few years ago, we transferred them to Dave, who as you see, is a board member. And since then, he and I and a few other folks founded Newfork. I say Newfork Rick, by the way. If you say Newfork, you think of Peter Davenport. And so I pronounce that Newfork Rick to differentiate them. But if you're not familiar with that, you should be, and what's going on there. We, of course, have had over the years volunteers and consultants. In fact, the the most number of volunteers and consultants we had was the first 10 years of the organization's existence, when two things were happening. And Dawa Bozka, who's on the line, was there about a year, right, Dawa, that you volunteered at CUFOS? Right. And the first 10 years were, as I said, Alan Hynek, right? He drew people like a magnet, including me. And so many people wanted to become involved, both professionals and standard volunteers. The other is that there have been two, maybe three, in my judgment, really exciting or interesting, intriguing times in the UFO field. One was the 1970s, particularly in the United States, after Blue Book closed. And people like Hynek came out professionally, and people like Bruce McAmey and Dick Haynes and others, names you know, Peter Sturrock. And it was unbelievably exciting and promising. And it was good. And I think the first, a successful early start to the center. The second time was a mixed period, I would think the 1990s, which were highlighted by abductions, right? John Mack, et cetera, but also controversies over Roswell and hidden files and all that rest, including when the U.S. government got involved again with the issue in its two reports and so forth. And then finally, what's going on now, post December 2017, that I'll talk about a little bit later. But we have volunteers. Many of them are in the Chicago area, but some are scattered around various places, including not just in the States. And we still have some consultants. Barry Greenwood, Bill Chalker, Chase Cockrell is a professor at the University of Vermont who's working with me on some projects that I'll mention. But CUFOS has always been small. Not that any UFO group is very large, but something that not maybe everybody knows is that CUFOS has never been a membership organization. That was something that Alan Hynek said, is I don't want to be like the other groups. I want to have this be more like a scientific research institute. Whether we've lived up to that, you can judge for yourself, but that has meant that we've always been smaller. And to dovetail on that, Hynek did say initially, we don't want to duplicate MUFON, we don't want to duplicate APRO, we don't want to have a stable of investigators and look into reports. Of course, we ended up doing that anyway, but mostly initially because of the International UFO Reporter and hiring Alan Hendry, who did such a great job of investigations, who wrote the UFO handbook, and it got us unexpectedly into investigating cases extensively, but only for a short period. And then after things halted, including because Alan Hynek went on to other things and there weren't funds available, we restarted it in the mid-'80s with a guy named Robert Boyd. That went okay for about 5 years, and then we said, no, we're not going to do that. So CUFOS, since then, has never specialized in investigating every case that comes to our attention. And we've tried to look at only cases of more interest, even though, of course, we still get cases. I still have a few people we work with who will assist us in investigating things. But we really try to focus on, which is harder these days, because as you know, all of us know, cases that are particularly evidential, cases with traces, with other physical evidence, with good videos, they're hard to come by these days. And, we can wonder about that later, but it means that investigations that require lots of resources that are really worth putting lots of resources in, we found are harder to come by. Okay, so what does CUFOS do? What have we been doing? What are current things? And so, CUFOS is an informational organization. Yeah, we're a scientific research institute, but what we came was a place to publish information about UFOs with the International UFO Reporter, the Journal of UFO Studies, and an organization that amassed lots of information and made it available as much as possible pre-internet, and now, since then more so. So, right, UFOCAT, almost everybody here knows about UFOCAT. You may not know it was probably the oldest database that's still existing in the sense that of an electronic version, because it was formed in the late 1960s by David Saunders. He transferred it to CUFOS. Fred Merritt, who was a great guy, even though he wasn't a scientist. He worked for Sears Roebuck and Company, as a high-level manager. Fred ran and kept UFOCAT going for several years on a mainframe. And then since the mid-1980s, Don Johnson, who is another CUFOS consultant based in Thailand now, has been maintaining UFOCAT. You've got the size there. We're now adding cases from other online sources. UFOCAT was never meant to be something you use for research directly. It's meant to be a vast resource for cases and citing report where they've been published, where they're located, where you can go for more information. We've stayed true to that, and there'll be an update soon. We may add 30,000 more entries, I think, Don says. And so this is really, I was very happy, for example, that when, whatever you think of Beatrice Villarreal research, right, on vanishing sources, which, there's controversy about some of their latest papers that she's published, when she and her team worked on trying to correlate the transients they found on plates taken at the Palomar Observatory with UFO reports, they used UFOCAT to do that. And so it really reinforces what we all know, is that a field of any science, you need data available to do your science, whether it's one case at a time or lots of cases. And so that's been something that was something I really appreciated. Of course, we have a lot of stuff on paper. Like I said, the case files, most of them are with Dave Marler in Albuquerque. I still have some here. There are some in Kalamazoo with Mike Swords. We've got them from everywhere that you can imagine. The goal is to scan them all and put them online. That's a big job, because you want to put them online and make them easily accessible, not just throw 100,000 PDF files online. And so it's not, and a lot of them are scanned. About, I'd say 60 or 70% are scanned, not always in the resolution we'd like to have. But it is difficult, and this is one of the areas you run into with, and we all know this, with running a UFO organization, is that, yeah, you can have great ideas, but the execution of them is difficult. Like I've said, what does it take to put these files online? It takes a programmer, right, with the right skills to do things, and it takes the funds to pay for all that ongoing storage space to do this. And, we've, like all UFO groups, or almost all of them, we've never had extra resources in any area, whether it's people or funding. But it's not just an aspiration. We're going to make it happen. We just have to figure out, how we're going to do that. And now, as I think many people here know, the National UFO Record Center acquired the APRO files after a long period where they were not available. And so now all three major historic groups, APRO, NICAP, and CUFOS, the case files are all being integrated together. MUFON, of course, is a whole different ball game, and of course they're still active, and we can talk about them later if you want to. The UFO Timeline, George Eberhard, longtime board member, CUFOS librarian, great guy, author of many books and so forth. He's put together this unbelievable UFO timeline that I use regularly as a resource. Again, another resource. You can see the theme at CUFOS has been, resources. Yes, we do research, and have done that, but it's really been, whether it's the Journal of UFO Studies, which was as Edoardo likes to remind me, the second academic journal ever published in the field, the first being UPAIR research, and or our IUR or our monographs. We want to provide information that's to the broader community. So that's what George has done here, and really a great resource. Another thing, following the same vein, is an idea that Mike Swords and Eddie Bullard had a few years ago. So this is an ongoing project that I think will soon come to fruition, and many of us are involved. But it's to write a book that is nothing quite like this available now, which is simply a broad introduction to all the different types of UFO evidence that's available, including some things that are analysis-wise, like UFO waves, which I know Vincente Juan has always been interested in, as have I. And Mike and Eddie have written most of the material. We also have a few other authors involved, including Tom Julian, who's on this call, and George and I, and one of our great volunteers, who's a professional editor, have been working on editing this volume. And we hope it'll be released by the end of the year. It is meant to be for the interested, serious members of the public who would like to say, I want to know about the UFO phenomena, but I don't want to know about just the Nimitz video, the Tic Tac, the Go Fast, and etc. I want to know about UFO evidence in total and what there has been over history. Because we all know on this call that all the recent stuff is fine, and it's why there is all that recent interest. But that recent interest wouldn't have occurred without the substructure that exists of all the previous UFO cases that have been investigated and written about. Otherwise, the Nimitz video would have fallen flat because it wouldn't have had the context there. So anyway, so this is another great project that is happening. So what are two things I want to talk about now? Ongoing research projects. There's always a little bit of research going on. It tends to be led by me. I'm the scientific director, so that makes sense. And so one of them is to make something finish and be completed after a long hiatus. Probably only a few of you know about this, but right now we know that one of the great interests, and in fact in our going on this side of the Atlantic, is another online meeting with Rich Hoffman talking about instrumented detection of UFOs. Well, instrumented detection has been something that people have been interested in since around 1950, when the Los Alamos scientists tried to detect something, the green fireballs in New Mexico as well. So it's nothing new. All of us know that. CUFOS, by the way, via Alan Hynek and two grad students, were thinking about creating a mobile van in the mid-1970s to go out and when there would be a hotspot of UFOs and try to detect real-time information on them. So we know that's something we thought about. People today look back and they don't know the history and all the rest. But in the 1990s, when abduction cases were so prominent, it occurred to me that how do we get physical evidence on those? If they're real, yeah, that would be great to be able to prove that something was happening. Well, the answer was really simple. Unlike regular UFO cases where you don't know where to go to measure something except in a few spots like the Yakima area in Washington State or Hessdalen in Norway, if somebody says they're having abduction experiences, well, you know where to go, their house, or these days, a device they carry around with them. Well, I had the idea in the mid-1990s, and one thing led to another, and we were able to put together a project to do this research. And are there changes in physical parameters when somebody says they had an experience? So it was done in coordination with the UFO Research Coalition, which was founded back actually in 1994 to work with Robert Bigelow. Before there was the Skinwalker Ranch, there was the UFO Research Coalition and Robert Bigelow in a one-year project. And that's MUFON, CUFOS, the Fund for UFO Research. And we got funding from a sponsor who many of you will know of in the field. A device was designed, its final incarnation was there. It made it look nice so it could sit on somebody's dresser in their bedroom. And we developed a pretty comprehensive and I think tight research methodology. People kept the journal. You can see it on the right. Of course, back in those days, right, handwritten on paper. They kept the journal of their experiences. And they marked down whether something happened or not, and they wrote about it. Meanwhile, once per second, we were measuring physical parameters. Interestingly enough, by the way, Jim Horan and his Brian Lathy were developing at the same time in the parapsychology community in the mid-1990s something similar capability. I'm blanking on the name of it now. I should be able to think of it. But in any case, it's interesting that I think the electronics was becoming available to do this kind of thing, which wouldn't have been even 10 years earlier. Finding people to participate was an incredibly time-consuming job, not because they didn't want to, though a lot of people were shy and said no, and we did not take video, we did not take photographs. That was going to be too much of an ethical problem. But because they had to meet several criteria. And the most important criteria was we, meaning our team, the project was called the Abduction Monitoring Project. I should have mentioned that earlier. We had to be convinced that they were having frequent enough experiences to make it worthwhile to put this device in their house, because that was a big commitment on their part and our part. Excuse me a second. So we managed to complete 13 cases. And the data collection had some struggles because we were collecting over a phone line, but generally it went okay. Even though we had some lost data, some problems, but generally it went okay. But what happened after that was that we had decided that it would be a good idea to not analyze the data ourselves, but to get an outside data analyst to look at it, so we could say no problems. You know, we got somebody who wasn't connected with the project will look at this data. And it was, you know, if you want to know a sad story about what happened to try to find people, I'll tell you. But the bottom line is, after literally almost 20 years, we finally realized we're going to have to do this ourselves. Many things that ensued in between and things that kept me busy, but it's actually happening. And I can tell you, of course, I can't tell you the results. They're not published and all that, but I can tell you that yes, a few people did have what we would all consider to be an abduction experience while the device was in their house. So, okay. Now, another project, and one of my colleagues who's on the call, Philippe, is working with me on this, is the following. This goes along with the CUFOS idea about, you know, resources and thinking about how to leverage resources. So whether or not you believe Blue Book did a good job with their work for with the U.S. Air Force, what we know is they created a catalog of cases, over 12,000, and they classified many of them as unknowns. There have been many other, maybe many is too strong, but there have been other government projects over the years from many places. I've listed some of the most prominent there. And some of the folks on this call have helped analyze the data from their own countries' projects. That's great. In the States, Brad Sparks put together a catalog of unknowns, and he added to it. He said, well, this should have been an unknown and all that, but he put together a catalog of unknowns, and that's been a good, also a good resource for people. Well, Philippe and I thought about this and said, you know, nobody's done that for Japan. Japan is the longest lasting government project in the world. And while there have been people have written about it, the books have written about it, technical notes and all the rest, nobody said, well, Japan has had a small number of unknown cases. What are they said is unknown? What have they called? What's the characteristics of those cases? And so we said, let's do it. And so that's what we're doing right now, is to put together a comprehensive look at the Japan unknowns. And Jean-Pierre, who was on the call, I enjoyed his lectures on the history of Japan, and I will draw on those to help us put together background on this. But we've got another great CUFOS volunteer involved with us on this, a woman who has data analyst experience and software experience. And we're going to go through and present simply. We're not going to reclassify the cases. That could be step 2 if you want. This is simply, if Blue Book says it's an unknown, okay, put it in our database and let's see what they have. A lot of you know, by the way, that better than me, that Japan has had many different standards for what it classifies as unknowns, but we're using their current list right now that's available. So there are a few other projects I have in the hopper, as it were, but those are I just wanted to mention those two as you know, one thing or two things rather that I'm working on. Okay, so now the future, or at least the near past and the future. So what do we do now? I've thought about it. I've decided to call the current era that we're in the era of public legitimacy, because we do know slowly that is happening. And I don't need to repeat all the ways that that's happening for everybody on this call, this meeting. But what does it mean then for groups that most of us represent compared to the newer organizations that exist, like the Sal Foundation, like SUOPs and so forth, who have their own mission? And of course, I'm involved with SUOPs and SCU, which was formed just about the time of December 20s, just before that. So they're really a new organization as well, with Robert Powell. But what does it mean for the rest of us who, you know, we're still standing, we're all here on the meeting? Well, any UFO group, new or old, really does, I think these are the 6 things that they do broadly categorized. And legacy groups, that's a phrase that Michael Zafone has used at SUOPs. I think that's a reasonable phrase, where the legacy organizations have done almost basically all of this, except possibly for instrumented detection, though the MADAR group with Fran Ridge, which has been around for many years, and Fran, of course, passed away last month. You know, they did this as well, and that was certainly a legacy group. So these are the things that we do. Possibly the one thing that we didn't do really is new, and I think that was maybe better, was the advocacy for transparency disclosure, right? This whole disclosure movement is new, or at least relatively new. And but everything else here, of course, many of us have been doing. So that's what UFO groups do generally, and I've listed examples, some of the new ones. What then should CUFOS be doing? What might your organizations be doing? And already very busy. Well, I'll just list a few that we've thought of, not necessarily that we're going to try to do ourselves, because we're small, and you know, and we're getting older and less energy, and so I can tell other people what to do. But number one, everybody uses the NUFORC database. Thank you, Peter Davenport. Fantastic service. But the NUFORC database is not a great database to use for research. Only certain types of research is it really useful and appropriate. Like my research on COVID, and did COVID cause more UFO reports? Not more real UFOs, right? Not more unexplained UFOs, just more UFO reports. It's great for that. Just like the research by Kirkpatrick, the former head of Aero, with 2 professors, same thing. Where do UFO reports occur? People say they saw something. So what the field desperately needs, and we can all point at each other and say we could have done this or not, though we all know why we didn't, is a master database of high quality sightings. Alan Hynek and Willie Smith tried to do this with UNICAT back in the early 1980s. I had some disagreements with how they went about it, but it was the right conception. And after Alan passed away, Willie continued on with it, but it never really became what they hoped it could be. Larry Hatch's U database, of course, was also in this same vein. And whether or not you thought it was a great idea, of course, he passed away, and it's now, hopelessly, it's what it is, but that's it. So there have been databases founded by and put together by organizations for each various countries, whether it's Italy or whatever. They're high quality sightings, and they aren't often separated by, this is an unexplained case as best as we can tell. These are explained cases, and that's useful. But they tend to be A in silos, but B, and that's the thing, they're not unified. I know there's an effort now with Euronet to put together a comprehensive databases, and that's fantastic. But the idea is that in any field of science, you need to say, this is the best data we have. And if we had something like this, it would allow research to go on from plenty of people who are clever but don't know what to do. I talk to people regularly, and I hear about people regularly who say, I'd like to do something in this, I'd like to do some analysis, but what data is available, that I can trust? And, the answer is not as much as you might think. Number 2, I'd like to see somebody write a history of the UFO field that talks about organizations like the ones we represent. Greg Agigian's book is fine, and it's an excellent history for what it does, but it doesn't do everything. And what it really doesn't do is talk about us. For example, the Center for UFO Studies is barely mentioned in the book. And it's not that we have fantastic accomplishments, but if you're going to talk about the history of the serious study of the field and versus the social history, the government history, we have a book about government history that some people in the meeting have contributed to, UFOs and Government, by Michael Swords and Robert Powell, etc. But we don't have a history of what we've been doing over the years, and we represent, and our predecessors, what serious work went on. And there really should be such a thing. Now, following in that vein, perhaps even more important for the current era, would be review articles. Many of the physical sciences and the sciences in general have what are called annual review publications that basically say, here's what we know about a particular area in our science. And they would be extremely valuable, particularly for new people entering the field, professionals, to say, here's what we know about trace cases. Here's what we know about waves of sight. Here's what we know about UFOs that interfere with various devices, et cetera, et cetera. I might even raise my hand and volunteer to write one of these. But the key thing is that they would be extremely valuable, as they are for all the other fields of science. Long-term trends in the UFO phenomena. You could be skeptical about UFOs, like some of us are. You can be more of a proponent that there's really something there and it's not hollow in the center like others. But all of us realize that there's been a change in sightings over time. And I will tell you that because the center, at least in the States, really was kind of the center of things, that I actually saw this happening in the early 1980s because we got all the periodicals, we learned about reports going on everywhere. Hynek really was the center, of information. Everybody funneled stuff to him. And I remember sitting around the office talking and saying, yeah, things are not like they used to be. And in fact, I foolishly predicted to my CUFOS colleagues in the early 1980s that there is never going to be another UFO wave in the United States like there has been. And I turned out to be right. Now, that was a foolhardy prediction in some respects, so I'm not taking any credit for it. But I had some sense that the UFO phenomena was changing. Okay, right or wrong, that's true. There have been no UFO waves since 1973 in the United States. Why? Again, whether you're skeptical or a proponent, that's an interesting question. And so the same thing with the types of sightings and all the rest. Another area where I would never say we failed in this, because as I've also said to people over the years, both reporters and colleagues, I've said, well, people complain about what we have accomplished or not accomplished in the field. And a lot of us have done amazing things with no resources. It's taken incredible dedication. But still, when you do science, everybody knows you have to have resources to do it. And I say, well, imagine the following situation. I have no graduate students. I have no institutional base and home, and I have almost no funding. How much do you expect us to get done? And everybody says, oh, not much. And I say, right, not much. So my point is not for special pleading. My point is that's the situation we've been in. Okay. Nevertheless, what it means is when people come to us and say, yeah, I hear you talking about how sightings have changed over time, but can you quantify that? What is the decrease in physical trace cases and CE3 cases and all the right? And the answer is, I can be kind of vague. I can tell you how it was in this spot or that spot, but I can't really tell you, globally or even in Europe as a whole or whatever, what's happened. So it's an area where, again, it would be wonderful to provide that kind of a foundation for people. Case investigations, right? I can say this, right, because CUFOS, as I've told you, never specialized in it except for a few years. But I have always thought for years that even those groups that do investigations should really try to emphasize looking at the better cases, right? It's the better cases that are going to give us more evidence, more information, rather than, I won't just say lights in the sky, but just your average case out there. And I do think that that's been, it's hard to do, by the way. If you have members and you have investigators, they want to be doing something, and to keep them interested. But I really would like to see us, and this is what Hynek wanted to do. Hynek, said, we're not going to look at every case, not just because we don't want to compete with APRO and MUFON, but because we want to try to look at the Cash Landrum case. We want to look at the Delphos case. Those are the cases we want to look at and spend time on. Shifting gears, oral histories. Tom Tuline's on this call, has done a fabulous job over the years with Jan Aldrich doing oral histories of people. And some of this has been done in other parts of the world, but it's a standard thing that any organized field does. And it's a terrible thing for CUFOS and for the field as a whole that it never happened with Alan Hynek. mostly because he simply became ill too quickly. And it was just not, once it became obvious that he was that ill, it was just too late to do anything. But I really would like to see us do this and continue the, for example, in the States, Tom's great work. Because again, it sets the substrate. And for CUFO, it goes along, even though we're not doing it directly, though I encourage people, it sets, again, a resource, right? You can see the theme of what I've been talking about here has been, resources. That's what CUFOS is all about. Many of your organizations are the same thing, resources, if you think about it broadly. So yeah, doing research, doing science, great. But given where we're at, that really has been our focus over the years. For CUFOS, finally, we're thinking about the future by trying to find people who will take over for what we're doing. It's not easy to do. Not just because of the new era in UFOs, but it was always hard to find people who were really serious and interested and wanted to be involved because they often wanted to go off and form their own groups. And whether it was Dick Haynes with NARCAP, though I think that was a wise decision in his case, NARCAP specializing in stuff, or other people who are new to the field often don't want to join existing groups. They want to go off on their own. And number two now, of course, in the new era, they want to join the new groups involved, and I understand all of that. So, but so it's hard. We're not getting any younger, and but that's really one of my main goals, because while maybe I'd like to do this forever, I don't think I will be. And 40 years is definitely enough. So anyway. I will stop there, and I assume, Edoardo, that we will now move to questions for our esteemed audience.